What should have been the happiest day of my life turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. The wedding was perfect until the moment the vase shattered everything. The soft glow of fairy lights filled the reception hall as I adjusted my veil. My heart raced with excitement. This was supposed to be the perfect day, my dream wedding. After months of planning, everything was flawless. The roses, the crystal centerpieces, the bridesmaids' dresses. "You look beautiful," Madison, my best friend, whispered, helping with my dress. I smiled, feeling like a princess. As the ceremony neared, I could feel the tension. Jacob's mother, Eleanor, watching me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. Little did I know this perfect day was about to spiral into a nightmare. The soft glow of fairy lights shimmered across the reception hall as I adjusted my veil one last time. My heart raced with excitement. This was supposed to be the perfect day, my dream wedding. I'm Emily, and like every bride, I had spent months meticulously planning every detail of this celebration. The delicate pink and white roses adorning each table, the crystal centerpieces catching the light from the chandeliers, even the exact shade of burgundy for the bridesmaids' dresses. Everything was exactly as I had imagined. "You look absolutely beautiful," my best friend Madison whispered, helping me adjust my dress. The ivory satin felt cool against my skin, and I couldn't help but smile at my reflection. The last 6 hours had been a whirlwind of hair, makeup, and nervous laughter with my bridesmaids. Now, standing here in my complete bridal look, I felt like a princess. The wedding coordinator poked her head into the bridal suite. "5 minutes until the ceremony, Emily. Your father's waiting outside." Her cheerful voice matched the joyful atmosphere that filled the entire venue. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "I can't believe this is happening," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Madison squeezed my hand reassuringly. "After 2 years of planning, you're finally marrying Jacob." She helped me adjust my bouquet, a stunning arrangement of white roses and baby's breath. Through the window, I saw guests taking their seats in the garden. The afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden light, making the scene look like something out of a fairy tale. The white chairs lined up perfectly on the manicured lawn, with an arch of flowers waiting at the end of the aisle. Jacob and I had chosen an outdoor ceremony, and it seemed perfect for a June wedding. My father's face lit up when I stepped out of the bridal suite. "Sweet pea," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen." I could see tears forming in his eyes as he offered his arm. The wedding coordinator quickly arranged my train and gave us a thumbs up. The soft strings of Canon in D began playing from the garden. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. As my bridesmaids began their procession, I caught glimpses of Jacob's family in the front row. His mother, Eleanor, sat rigidly in her designer dress, her expression unreadable. Something about her demeanor made me uneasy, but I pushed the thought away. This was my perfect day, and nothing was going to spoil it. "Ready, Dad?" I whispered, patting his hand gently. I nodded, unable to find the words. The wedding coordinator signaled us, and as the bridal march began to play, we took our first step toward the garden doors. The guests rose to their feet, and I saw Jacob standing at the altar, handsome in his black tuxedo. Everything felt magical, like a dream come true. The weather was perfect, the decorations were beautiful, and in just a few minutes, I would be Mrs. Jacob Chen. Little did I know that this perfect day was about to turn into my worst nightmare, and that crystal vase on the gift table would become a weapon I never saw coming. As we neared the altar, I noticed Jacob's smile seemed strained, almost forced. His mother was whispering something to him, her eyes locked on me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. But I kept walking, kept smiling, brushing off the feeling, thinking it was just wedding day jitters. After all, what could go wrong on the happiest day of my life? The ceremony started normally enough. The pastor's voice was warm and welcoming as he began speaking about love and commitment. but I couldn't shake off the uneasiness I felt. When I noticed Jacob's hands were trembling as he held mine, his mother's constant staring was starting to make me uncomfortable, and I could see her continuously gesturing to Jacob whenever the pastor looked down at his notes. "Before we proceed with the vows," the pastor announced, "the mother of the groom would like to say a few words." This wasn't part of our planned ceremony. I shot a questioning look at Jacob, but he avoided my eyes. Eleanor stood up, smoothing her expensive silk dress, and made her way to the M. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she began, her voice sickly sweet. "As Jacob's mother, I've always wanted the best for him. Always." She emphasized that last word while looking directly at me. "I just hope certain people understand the importance of family traditions and respect the way." The way she said it made my skin crawl. Madison, my maid of honor, squeezed my arm gently. We both knew this was Eleanor's way of expressing her disapproval. She had never forgiven me for refusing to sign the prenup she'd sprung on me just yesterday. A Chen family tradition, she'd called it. But I knew better. It was just another way to control her son. After what felt like an eternity, Eleanor returned to her seat, but the damage was done. The atmosphere had shifted. I could hear whispers among the guests, and Jacob's face had turned an uncomfortable shade of red. The pastor, trying to salvage the situation, quickly moved on to the vows. As we exchanged rings, I noticed Jacob's best man, Mike, giving him strange looks. Mike had been acting weird all morning, constantly checking his phone and whispering with Eleanor. Something was off, but I tried to focus on the ceremony. This was still my wedding day, after all. During the first photo session, things got worse. Eleanor insisted on rearranging everyone, putting herself front and center. "The family matriarch should be prominent," she declared, pushing me to the side when I politely suggested we follow the photographer's recommendations. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Jacob," she called out, her voice sharp, "don't you think a son should stand next to his mother in family photos?" Before Jacob could answer, I saw him check his phone. His face went pale. Whatever he saw made him clench his fists, and for the first time in our 2-year relationship, I saw something in his eyes that scared me. The photographer suggested we take a break before the reception. As we walked back inside, I overheard Eleanor on her phone. "Yes, everything's ready. She won't know what hit her." She quickly hung up when she noticed me, flashing that fake smile I'd grown to hate. The reception hall looked beautiful, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The crystal vase on the gift table caught my eye. It was a wedding gift from Eleanor, supposedly a family heirloom. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, suddenly appearing beside me. "It's very fragile, just like some relationships." The threat in her voice was barely veiled. Madison pulled me aside during the setup for our entrance. "Emily, something's not right," she whispered. "I saw Eleanor showing Jacob some kind of messages on her phone, and he looked furious." Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator called us for the grand entrance. As we prepared to enter the reception, Jacob's grip on my arm was uncomfortably tight. The crystal vase gleamed under the chandelier lights, and Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, that beautiful vase would become the weapon that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new Mr. and Mrs. Chen." The DJ's announcement was met with applause, but I could feel Jacob's fingers digging into my arm as we entered. His face maintained a smile, but his eyes were cold, distant, like he was a completely different person from the man I'd fallen in love with. We had barely made it to our seats at the head table when Eleanor materialized beside us, her phone in hand. "Jacob, sweetheart, I need to show you something else." Her voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes gleamed with malice. I watched as she showed him something on her screen, and his face darkened even further. "Is this true?" He turned to me, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. I stared at him, confused. "Jacob, what are you talking about?" Instead of answering, he shoved the phone in my face. On the screen were photoshopped images of me with my ex-boyfriend, dated just last week. My heart dropped. This was Eleanor's plan all along. "Those are fake," I said firmly, looking between Jacob and his mother. "You know I've been busy with wedding preparations. I haven't seen Tom in years." Eleanor let out a dramatic gasp. "Are you calling me a liar, Jacob? She's accusing your mother of lying." The reception hall had grown quieter, guests sensing the tension. Madison started to make her way toward us, but Eleanor blocked her path. "This is a family matter," she hissed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Jacob?" I reached for his hand, trying to reason with him. "Think about this. Why would your mother suddenly have these pictures? Why show them now, at our wedding?" I could see doubt flicker in his eyes for a moment, but Eleanor wasn't done. "I hired a private investigator," she announced triumphantly, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I knew she wasn't good enough for you, Jacob. I knew she'd hurt you, just like all the others." Her words echoed through the room, and suddenly, all eyes were on us. That's when I noticed Jacob's hands trembling as he reached for the crystal vase. Time seemed to stretch, and everything moved in slow motion. "You're just like my father said," he spat, his words venomous. "A gold digger who will destroy our family." The next few seconds played out like a nightmare I couldn't escape. The crystal vase sailed through the air. I heard Madison scream, and someone, maybe my father, yelled, "No!" But it was too late. The vase struck my shoulder, shattering on impact. A sharp pain shot through me as the crystal shards rained down, some piercing my skin, others getting caught in the fabric of my wedding dress. The reception hall erupted into chaos. Guests leapt to their feet, voices raised in shock and outrage. Through the confusion, I saw Eleanor's smug, satisfied smirk. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. Jacob stood frozen, staring at his hands as if he couldn't comprehend what he had just done. Blood dripped down my arm, staining the white satin of my dress. But oddly, I felt calm, too calm. Looking directly at Jacob, I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, my voice steady despite the pain. "You just proved that your mother's love is more important than the truth, and that's why this marriage is over." Madison and my father rushed to my side as Jacob's best man struggled to hold him back. "Someone call an ambulance," I heard people shout, but I didn't stop. I walked toward the exit, head held high, ignoring the throbbing pain. The last thing I heard before the doors swung shut was Eleanor's voice, shrill and accusing. "See what you made him do." Outside, the June evening that had once seemed so perfect now felt suffocating. My father helped me into his car, with Madison climbing in beside me. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. My wedding dress was torn and bloodied, my makeup streaked with tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. But when I looked into my eyes, I saw something different. They were clear. They were determined. "Take me to the hospital," I said quietly. "And then we're calling the police." The distant sounds of chaos still lingered from the reception hall, but I didn't look back. What I hadn't known then was that this violent end to my wedding day was just the beginning of a much bigger, more shocking story. The emergency room's fluorescent lights made everything feel surreal. I sat on the edge of a hospital bed, still wearing my torn wedding dress, as a nurse carefully removed tiny crystal shards from my shoulder and arm. Madison hadn't left my side, and my father paced the small room, making calls to family members. 12 stitches, the doctor said, examining the deepest cut on my shoulder. "You're lucky none of the major arteries were hit." Lucky didn't exactly feel like the right word, but I nodded silently. The police officer standing by the door scribbled down notes in his notepad, the weight of the situation sinking in with each passing minute. "Ms. Thompson," the officer said, using my maiden name, a name I was grateful to keep now. "Are you ready to make your statement?" I looked down at my hands, still trembling slightly, and noticed I was still wearing my wedding ring. With deliberate movements, I slipped it off and handed it to Madison. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I want to press charges. The words had barely left my mouth when my phone started buzzing. Jacob's face flashed on the screen. The happy, smiling photo I'd taken of him months ago now felt like it was from another lifetime. Don't answer it, Madison warned, but I already had the phone in my hand. Something in me needed to hear what he could say to justify what he'd done. I put the phone on speaker. Everyone in the room needed to witness this. Emily, Jacob's voice cracked. Baby, I'm so sorry. Mom showed me those pictures and I lost control. But she told me after you left that they might be fake. Please come back. We can fix this. In the background, I could hear Eleanor hissing something I couldn't make out. The nurse paused in her work, watching me with concerned eyes. I took a deep breath. Fix this? I repeated, my voice cold. You threw a vase at me during our wedding, Jacob, in front of everyone we know because your mother showed you some fake photos. You don't understand, he pleaded. Mom was just trying to protect our family. She's always been right about these things, my last girlfriend. I cut him off mid-sentence. Officer, I said loudly, enough for Jacob to hear. I'd like to add that to my statement. He's admitting this isn't the first time he's been violent because of his mother's interference. The police officer nodded, still writing. You're talking to the police now? Jacob's voice changed, growing harder. Emily, don't do this. Think about my career. Think about my family's reputation. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. You should have thought about that before you turned our wedding into an assault scene, I replied. Don't call me again, my lawyer will be in touch. I ended the call just as he started to protest. The silence in the hospital room was broken by the sound of camera shutters. A small crowd of people had gathered at the door. Someone had tipped off the local news. My father quickly closed the door, but I knew it was too late. By morning, this would be everywhere. My phone buzzed again, this time with messages from unknown numbers, screenshots of social media posts. Guests had recorded everything. The video of Jacob throwing the vase was already going viral. Look at this, Madison said, showing me her phone. Someone had started a hashtag, #WeddingDayJustice. The posts were filled with support, anger, and calls for Jacob's arrest. Eleanor's role in the incident wasn't missed either. People who had witnessed her manipulation were sharing their accounts. Ms. Thompson, the officer said gently, given that this is now getting media attention, would you like police protection? These situations can escalate quickly. I looked at my reflection in the window. Bandaged, bruised, but unbroken. Yes, I nodded, and I want a restraining order against both Jacob and his mother. The officer made more notes, then stepped out to make arrangements. As he left, a social worker entered, carrying a stack of papers and pamphlets. I'm here to help you understand your options, she said kindly, sitting beside my bed, and to connect you with support services. She paused, looking at me carefully. Also, there's something you should know. 2 other women have already come forward, former girlfriends of Jacob's. They say they have similar stories about Eleanor's interference and Jacob's violence. Madison gasped, but I felt an odd sense of calm. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about stopping a cycle of abuse that had been hidden behind wealth and social status for too long. As the social worker laid out resources and options, I made a silent promise to myself. This story wasn't going to be buried or forgotten. My father finally stopped pacing and took my hand. Sweet pea, he said softly. What do you need right now? I squeezed his hand, looking at the support team gathered around me, family, friends, and professionals all ready to help. I need to rest, I said, and then tomorrow, we will start fighting back. Morning light filtered through the curtains of my childhood bedroom. I'd spent the night at my parents' house, surrounded by the comfort of familiar things. The trending notifications on my phone hadn't stopped. Our wedding disaster was now national news. I was about to silence my phone when an unknown number flashed across the screen. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. The voice on the other end wasn't what I expected. "Emily, this is Arthur Chen, Jacob's father." My breath caught in my throat. Jacob's father had been notably absent from the wedding, something Eleanor had blamed on a sudden business trip. "I saw what happened," Arthur continued, his voice heavy. "I'm so sorry, but I need to tell you something important." I put the call on speaker as Madison walked in with coffee, sensing the gravity in the air. "I'm listening," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. What I heard next shifted everything. "I'm not on a business trip." Arthur's voice trembled. "Eleanor told everyone that, but the truth is I left her 3 months ago. I've been gathering evidence of her manipulation, not just with Jacob, but with our whole family. Emily, what happened to you? It's a pattern." Madison sat down beside me. Both of us focused intently as Arthur continued. "Eleanor's done this before, not just with Jacob's previous girlfriends, but with anyone who poses a threat to her control. She destroys them." "But why?" I asked, my mind spinning as I thought about all the perfectly staged photos she'd shown Jacob. "Because she's losing her grip," Arthur explained, his voice shaking. "Jacob's trust fund comes under his full control once he's married. She's been embezzling from it for years. A marriage would expose everything." He paused, his voice steadying. "I have proof: bank statements, emails, everything. I was quietly building a case against her, but after what she did to you..." My hands trembled with disbelief. "Are you saying she planned this? All of it?" I asked, the weight of his words crashing down on me. "Yes," Arthur's voice cracked, the pain clear. "She hired someone to create those photos. She's been conditioning Jacob for months, telling him stories about you meeting with your ex. She even..." He hesitated, the words coming with difficulty. "She even paid people to follow you, to take photos of you going about your day and then edited them to make it look suspicious." The coffee in my hand had gone cold, the reality of his words sinking in. "But why make Jacob violent? Why push him that far?" My voice was barely a whisper now. "Because she needed you to leave him," Arthur said grimly. "A divorce, where he's at fault, means the prenup wouldn't matter. The trust fund would remain under family control. Her control? She's done this twice before with his previous engagements." Madison was already pulling up news articles on her phone. Sure enough, buried deep in local news archives, there were 2 similar stories: broken engagements and whispers of violence, all tied to Eleanor's obsession with gold-digging girlfriends. "Mr. Chen," I said carefully, choosing my words with precision, "would you be willing to tell this to the police?" "I'm already on my way to the station," he replied firmly. "And Emily, there's more. Eleanor isn't just stealing from Jacob's trust fund. She's been involved in money laundering through our family's charitable foundation. I have evidence of that too." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Jacob. "I know the truth now. Dad told me everything. I can't believe I let her control me like this. I'm going to the police too. I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I have to stop her." My head was spinning. Arthur was still talking, revealing years of manipulation and financial crimes. Eleanor hadn't just orchestrated my wedding day disaster. She'd been orchestrating her son's entire life, destroying anyone who threatened her control. "Emily," Arthur said finally, "I know you have every right to press charges against Jacob. What he did was inexcusable, regardless of his mother's manipulation. But I hope you'll include Eleanor's role in your statement. She needs to be stopped." After ending the call, I sat in silence for a long moment. The bruises on my shoulder throbbed, a reminder that regardless of Eleanor's schemes, real harm had been done. But now I understood. I wasn't just a victim of domestic violence. I was part of a larger story of control, manipulation, and financial crime. Madison squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do?" I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer's number. "We're going to need a forensic accountant," I said firmly. And we're going to expose everything. The hashtag #sign Wedding Day Justice was about to take on a whole new meaning. My lawyer's office buzzed with activity. In just 48 hours, what had started as a domestic violence case had exploded into something much bigger. Linda, my attorney, spread documents across her desk, while a forensic accountant named Marcus examined financial records on his laptop. "The evidence Mr. Chen provided is damning," Linda said, adjusting her glasses. "Money laundering, embezzlement, fraud. Eleanor's been busy." She handed me a stack of papers. "And look at these emails. She's been planning your wedding disaster for months." I skimmed through the emails, my stomach turning. There it was in black and white. Eleanor's detailed plans to provoke Jacob, the arrangements with a Photoshop expert, and even discussions about the perfect moment to show Jacob the fake photos. "We've received calls from 6 more women," Linda continued. "All former girlfriends or fiancés of Jacob, all clients at Eleanor's country club. The same pattern. She'd manipulate situations, create false evidence of cheating, and push until there was a violent incident. Then she'd swoop in to help manage the aftermath and the victim's silence." My phone buzzed. Another message from Jacob. He'd been texting apologies hourly, along with updates about his cooperation with the investigation. I hadn't responded yet. How could I? The bruises on my shoulder were still fresh, the trauma still raw. "Emily," Madison called from the conference room, "you need to see this." She had the local news pulled up on her tablet. Eleanor was giving an interview, playing the role of concerned mother perfectly. "I only wanted to protect my son," she said tearfully to the camera. "If anyone's a victim here, it's Jacob. That girl provoked him." I clicked it off, unable to watch more. "That's it," I said, standing up. "She doesn't get to control the narrative anymore." I turned to Linda. "What do we need to make this all public?" Linda smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment. "We've got enough to go to the DA, but first..." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Remember that reporter who's been calling? I think it's time we talk to her." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Emily Chen from Channel 7 News arrived with a camera crew. We set up in Linda's conference room, where everything was laid out: the financial documents, the emails, statements from other victims, all of it. "Before we start," I said to the reporter, "I want to be clear. This isn't just about what happened at my wedding. This is about a pattern of abuse and manipulation that's been going on for years, and it needs to stop." The interview lasted 2 hours. I walked through everything: the wedding, the vase, the aftermath, the revelations from Arthur Chen, the financial crimes, and the stories of other victims. As I spoke, I could see the reporter's eyes widening. This wasn't just another wedding gone wrong story. This was something much bigger. "One more thing," I added at the end. "To any other women who've been through something similar, it's not your fault, and it's not too late to come forward." After the camera stopped rolling, my phone exploded with notifications. Someone had leaked security footage from the wedding, showing the exact moment everything happened. But this time, viewers weren't just seeing the violence, they were seeing Eleanor in the background orchestrating everything. "Ms. Thompson," Marcus called out, still focused on his laptop, "I found something else. These transactions, Eleanor hasn't just been doing this with Jacob's trust fund. There are at least 3 other families involved. She's been running this scheme for years." Linda was already dialing the DA's office. Madison squeezed my hand as we listened to her arrange an emergency meeting. This had become bigger than any of us expected. "You know she'll try to discredit you," Madison warned softly. "She'll make up more stories, try to paint you as the villain." I looked at my reflection in the office window. The bride in the torn dress was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone ready for a fight. "Let her try," I replied. "This time, we have the truth on our side." The next few hours were a blur of activity. More victims came forward, Financial records were subpoenaed. The DA's office launched a formal investigation, and through it all, one thought kept running through my mind. Sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to something important, a chance to make real change. By evening, wedding day justice had evolved into dark stop-a-lenner, with thousands sharing similar stories of manipulation and abuse. What had started as my personal nightmare was becoming a movement. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when I arrived. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and today was the first hearing. Eleanor's smiling face had been all over the news, playing the victim card perfectly until this morning. The headlines had changed overnight. Wedding nightmare, mother-in-law's criminal empire exposed. I smoothed down my navy blue blazer, the formal outfit a stark contrast to the wedding dress I'd last been seen in publicly. Linda walked beside me, carrying a briefcase full of evidence. Behind us, 4 other women, all previous victims of Eleanor's manipulation, formed a united front. "She's already inside," Madison whispered, checking her phone. "And you won't believe what she's wearing, a black veil, like she's mourning." I almost laughed at the theatrics. Classic Eleanor, always putting on a show. Inside the courtroom, I saw her for the first time since the wedding. Eleanor sat in the defendant's section, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Jacob and his father sat on the opposite side, both looking grim. When Jacob caught my eye, he quickly looked away, shame written across his face. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Martinez entered, her expression serious as she surveyed the packed courtroom. The proceedings began with the prosecution outlining their case. "Your Honor," the DA began, "what we have here is not just a case of domestic violence, but a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Mrs. Eleanor Chen systematically orchestrated violent incidents to maintain control over multiple trust funds and family fortunes." Eleanor's lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. One by one, financial records appeared on the courtroom screens. Emails, bank transfers, photoshopped images. The elaborate web of lies began to unravel. Then came the testimonies. I went first, my voice steady as I recounted everything. The wedding, the vase, the aftermath. But this time, I wasn't just telling my story, I was exposing the bigger picture. It wasn't just about the trust fund, I explained. Eleanor had been running this scheme through her social circles for years. She'd identify wealthy families, infiltrate their lives, and then systematically destroy any relationship that threatened her control. The violence wasn't an accident. It was her signature move. Eleanor's calm facade cracked when Arthur Chen took the stand. "My wife," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "used our son as a weapon. She manipulated him, gaslit him, and turned him into someone he was not. And she did it all for money." The final blow came from Marcus, the forensic accountant. His presentation showed the full scope of Eleanor's financial crimes. Over $5 million embezzled from various trust funds, all carefully hidden through a network of fake charities and offshore accounts. During a brief recess, I found myself face to face with Eleanor in the courthouse bathroom. She'd lost her theatrical grief, replacing it with cold fury. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You're nothing, just another gold digger who—" "Save it," I cut her off, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "Your act doesn't work anymore. We all know who you are." "I was protecting my family," she spat. "No," I replied calmly. "You were protecting your bank account and now you've lost everything. Your son, your husband, your reputation, and soon, your freedom." Back in the courtroom, Judge Martinez's verdict was decisive. Eleanor was facing multiple felony charges, with a trail of victims and evidence too strong to ignore. As the bailiff led her away, her designer outfit and black veil couldn't hide her rage. Jacob approached me afterward, his father by his side. "Emily, I know nothing I say can fix what I did," he began. "You're right," I interrupted gently. "It can't. But testifying against your mother was a start. Get help, Jacob. Break the cycle." Outside, the other victims gathered around me. We'd formed an unexpected bond, survivors of Eleanor's manipulation, united in seeking justice. Reporters called out questions, and cameras flashed, but all I felt was peace. "What's next for you?" a reporter shouted. I looked at the group of strong women beside me, then at Linda, who was already talking about starting a foundation to help other victims of financial abuse and manipulation. "Now," I said clearly, "we make sure this never happens to anyone else." 6 months after the wedding that never was, I stood at the podium of the Women's Support Center, facing a room full of people. The Financial Abuse and Manipulation Awareness Foundation, for short, was officially opening its doors. The bruises had long since healed, but the mission they inspired was just beginning. "When I chose my wedding flowers last year," I began, managing a smile, "I never imagined I'd be using the refunded deposit to help start a foundation. But sometimes life's worst moments lead us to our true purpose." The audience included familiar faces, the other survivors of Eleanor's schemes, my legal team, and even Arthur Chen, who'd become one of our strongest supporters. Madison sat in the front row, beaming with pride. The local news cameras rolled, but this time I welcomed their presence. "Eleanor Chen will serve 15 years for her crimes," I continued, "but her conviction isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a bigger conversation about financial abuse, manipulation, and the silence that often surrounds it." Through the windows, I could see the garden where we'd planted healing roses, each one representing a survivor's story. Red for physical abuse, white for financial manipulation, pink for emotional trauma. Our garden was already blooming, just like the women who tended it. "Last week, someone asked me if I regret what happened at my wedding," I said, pausing to let the weight of the words settle. "The truth is, I regret that it happened, but I'm not sorry it happened to me, because it led to this. A place where survivors can find support, resources, and most importantly, hope." Linda, now head of our legal advocacy department, stood up to share the statistics. 50 cases already under review, 3 more criminal investigations launched, and a growing network of professionals ready to help victims of financial abuse. "But numbers don't tell the whole story," I added. "Real change happens one person at a time." I gestured to our wall of triumph, photos of survivors at key moments in their journey, moving into their own homes, starting new businesses, graduating from programs, living free from manipulation and control. After the ceremony, Madison helped me pack up my office. The frame on my desk caught her eye. It held the torn piece of my wedding dress, now a symbol of strength rather than trauma. "Have you heard from Jacob?" she asked carefully, knowing he'd been in therapy since the trial. "His last letter came yesterday," I replied, undoing better, speaking at men's groups about breaking cycles of abuse. "It doesn't excuse what he did, but at least he's trying to make amends." My phone buzzed. Another message from our hotline, another woman reaching out for help, another story needing to be heard. 6 months ago, I'd been the one needing help. Now, I was in a position to offer it. "Ready to head out?" Madison asked, holding up my coat. Through the window, I could see the sun setting over our healing garden, casting a warm glow over the roses. "You know what?" I smiled, picking up the new case file. "I think I'll stay a bit longer. Someone needs to know they're not alone." As I sat down to read the message, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't a victim in a torn wedding dress anymore. She was a survivor, a warrior, and a guide for others finding their way out of darkness. My wedding day had been meant to mark the beginning of one life, but instead, it had led me to another one, filled with purpose, strength, and the joy of helping others find their voice. Sometimes the happiest endings come from the most unexpected beginnings. The healing roses bloomed outside my window, their petals catching the last rays of sunlight. Each one told a story of survival, of triumph over manipulation and abuse, and mine was just one bloom in a garden of hope, growing stronger with each passing day. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone had witnessed Jacob's outburst, but the question remained, Was this just a reaction to his mother's manipulation, or had he always been this person? As I stood there, still reeling from the attack, I couldn't help but wonder how much of this was his own fault, and how much of it had been planted in his mind by his controlling mother. The truth seemed tangled in a web of manipulation, deceit, and violence, but one thing was clear. I couldn't live in a relationship built on lies and abuse anymore. Jacob's actions had shattered everything I thought I knew about him. Yes, Eleanor had played her part, pushing him to the brink, but his hands were still the ones that threw the vase, his voice the one that yelled at me. A man who loved me wouldn't have done that no matter what his mother said. I turned to look at him one last time. His face was pale, filled with regret and confusion, but all I could feel was the sting of betrayal. "I'm done, Jacob. This marriage is over. Your mother's manipulation is not an excuse for your behavior." The room fell into a stunned silence. Jacob reached out for me, but I took a step back. There was nothing left to say. No apology could undo the damage done. As I walked away, I realized I was no longer the person who walked down that aisle just hours ago. The woman who stood here now was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth and was ready to walk away from a lifetime of lies. The wedding day that was supposed to be the happiest day of my life had turned into my moment of awakening, and in that moment, I knew. Leaving him was the first step towards my true freedom.
My dream home, filled with my own money, was the culmination of my hard work. It was filled with my blood, sweat, and tears. I never imagined it would be taken away by my in-laws, but I won't let that happen. I will do whatever it takes to stop them, even if it means putting my whole life on the line. My name is Juniper, and I got married at the age of 33. I never really thought about getting married. I saw others around me getting hitched and started dating someone at the time. I figured it would be better to have someone by my side. Looking back, it wasn't a wise way of thinking. My husband's name is Ambrose. We met at a group date when I was 30. I was working for a foreign company, while Ambrose was just a regular employee at a supermarket. Naturally, there was a huge salary difference between us, and Ambrose's job was also very demanding. But we had no children, and I had a decent income, so we never struggled to make ends meet. We understood and respected each other's work and enjoyed our life together. Well, except for one thing. The biggest stress for me was dealing with the bullying from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law in my husband's family home. Both our houses were close by, so from the beginning of my marriage I was often invited to my mother-in-law's house when I had days off. I could have refused, but as a newlywed, it was difficult to turn them down. As soon as my husband and I arrived at my in-law's house, my mother-in-law gave me orders. "Oh, you're finally here. Can you make some tea for us? And when you're done, please clean the second floor." While I was making the tea as instructed, my sister-in-law arrived and treated me like a housekeeper. "I'll have some black tea. Can you buy some sweets at the convenience store?" I thought, why do I have to do this? They should do it themselves. At the very least, they had to choose the same drinks. I was about to say that, but in the end, I followed what I was told and headed to the convenience store. After all, they are my husband's family, and I didn't want to cause any trouble. Besides, going to my in-laws' house was only once or twice a month. As long as I obeyed their words at the time, there wouldn't be any harm. For the time being, I acted as I was told, but eventually I reached my limit. One day when I was summoned by my mother-in-law to go to their house, she spoke to me with a serious expression. "Juniper, can I talk to you for a moment?" At the time, a warning sound rang in my head. "There's no way it's good news." I replied as a formality, "What's the matter?" As expected, my bad feeling was right on target. "Listen, Juniper, our living expenses are a bit tight this month. I need to borrow about $1,000. Can you help me out?" My mother-in-law peered into my face as if it was a matter of course that I should lend her money. $1,000? No way, I said in my mind and flatly refused. "Mother-in-law, I'm sorry, but I can't lend you $1,000. I already gave you $500 last month, remember?" I uttered. Yes, last month I loaned my mother-in-law $500, and it seemed she got a taste for it. But the $500 was for my husband's hospital bill, wasn't it? My mother-in-law made excuses as if she was indignant. This month is for living expenses. We are really struggling. Please help us. My mother-in-law begged me with a sweet voice. Even with the $500 from last month, I never found out what my father-in-law's diagnosis was. Despite being for his hospital bill, it seemed like my mother-in-law and sister-in-law just wanted money to use as they pleased. I had a hunch that was the case. I couldn't give my mother-in-law any more money. Besides, our family wasn't that well off either. We relied mostly on my salary since my husband's salary wasn't enough to live on. Come on, can't you just help out a bit since my mom is struggling? Remember how excited you were when you got your summer award? Ambrose said. My mother-in-law's eyes lit up at the mention of the word bonus, and she turned to us. Juniper, did you get a bonus, and yet you refused to help me? For some reason, I was being blamed. Yeah, I did get a bonus, but I saved it all for our dream of owning our own home. Yes, I had a dream of one day building my own home filled with all my personal touches. It had been my dream since I was a child. That's why I never splurged on luxuries and saved every penny of our bonuses. Just because I got a bonus didn't mean I had a reason to help my mother-in-law. She continued to complain, but I kept refusing. And finally, we left their house. On the way back in the car, I couldn't help but express my dissatisfaction to my husband. Hey, why am I the one who has to take all this flack? If your mom doesn't have enough money, why doesn't she ask you for help? My husband felt that off with a disgruntled sigh. You make more than me, don't you? Plus, you get bonuses, so why can't you help out a little? He sounded like I was the bad guy. But your mother said I'm living a lie. She thinks you make more money than I do, even though you don't. Isn't it weird for her to demand money from me? I resented. Who cares? Instead of whining about it, why don't you just do it? He asked. My husband's impossible attitude made me really angry. I wanted to yell at him, but I held my tongue. Anyway, I'm not going to help anymore. Last month I was lied to about your father's medical expenses. If you're worried, then you figure it out from now on. I finished. My husband clicked his tongue and fell silent. When it came to money issues, he was never able to stand up for himself due to his low-paying job. He didn't say anything more on the matter. Prior to this, my mother-in-law would often approach me with requests for money or with seemingly reasonable excuses such as, "This month is really tough. Could you transfer $500? Or, "My husband might need to be hospitalized. Please transfer $1,000. I didn't want to pay for anything, but every time I refused, my husband called me stingy and narrow-minded. I ignored all this and didn't want to spend any more of my savings on my mother-in-law's demands. Besides, I was close to achieving my goal of saving enough money for a down payment on my dream house. After a few months, my dream of building my own house finally came true. Since it was my decision, I have to pay for everything, including home ownership. Until I started working at my current company, I had a hard time, but all my efforts paid off. At this point, I felt deeply satisfied. Before I started construction, my husband had warned me, "I'm not paying for this, you know that." "That's okay, Ambrose," I replied calmly. "It's my dream, and I've saved up for it. You don't have to worry about the expense." However, my low-income husband still couldn't afford to help me. In addition, his supermarket had been struggling for the past few months, and as a result, his paycheck was reduced. Due to my husband's low income, he started refusing to even provide for our daily expenses. On the other hand, our home was almost completed after the construction company finished its work. As I thought about what kind of furniture to put in and how to arrange everything, I found myself enjoying the work despite it usually being a source of stress. Although I was often invited to my in-laws' home, I would decline by saying I had a meeting with the construction company, and my husband started going there alone more often. Finally, my long-awaited dream home was completed. I did it! I finally got my dream home filled with everything I've ever wanted, I thought to myself. We were scheduled to move in over the weekend. That was when my husband suddenly said, "Why don't we order some high-end sushi this weekend?" "High-end sushi? Aren't we moving this weekend?" I asked. He just laughed. "Incredibly, my mother is coming to our new place. What are we supposed to do? Not offer her hospitality?" he said. "Your mother? Why? I hadn't heard anything about your mother visiting this weekend, and we certainly don't have time to entertain guests during a move," I firmly stated. "It's not just for us. It's also a housewarming gift for my mom. We'll all be living together, so we should celebrate properly on the first day." As if nothing had happened, he said, "The new house is for you, Mom. We'll be her roommates." I was in disbelief. What is this guy even talking about? I mentally said, I'm supposed to live with the mother-in-law in the house I paid for. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I raised my voice and replied, "Don't be ridiculous. Who gave you the right to decide this is our home? I built it with all my money. I'll never allow cohabitation." I resented. My husband responded with defiance. I'm the eldest son, you know. It's only natural for family members to live together. You haven't contributed a single dollar, and yet you think it's your house just because you are the man of the house? I won't stand for it, I shouted, and he stood up straight. Enough, calm down. Remember, you are the one who married into this family. Think carefully before you speak, he said, and then left the house. Calm down, that's my line, I shouted after him as he headed for the door. Honestly, the fact that he left and that we had a fight were both irrelevant to me. There was no way I would let those people occupy the house I worked so hard to build. The next day, my husband returned home and said with a grin, "Have you reflected on your behavior?" "What do I have to reflect on?" I replied. Can you really say that? If you refuse to live together, I will divorce you right away, he stated. Does he think this is a trap? I thought. He looked down on me, feeling triumphant. Think carefully about the position you're in, he said, and left the house again. Isn't this actually a lucky situation? Moving day arrived, and we finished moving all our belongings and started unpacking. Then the intercom buzzed. Hey, it's me. Open up already. My husband was standing at the entrance. Through the monitor, I could see my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and even my father-in-law gathered there. May I ask who's there? I asked stiffly, which seemed to anger my husband. I said, it's me. Hurry up and open the door. The moving company's truck will be here soon. The moving company? But we're done moving all our belongings. Are you sure you've got the right place? I asked. Stop messing around. He started banging on the doors and windows. If you don't open up, I'm going to break this window. Not wanting to disturb the neighbors any further, I called the police right away. Hello, my ex-husband and his family are causing a scene outside my home. Please come quickly, I uttered. The police responded immediately, and a patrol car arrived within 5 minutes. My ex-husband and his family were arrested on the spot for breaking the window of my new home. As they were being taken away, my ex-husband shouted, I'm the owner of this house. We just had a little argument with my wife. Actually, the house is in my name, and you are just my ex-husband, right? I confronted him with reality. Ex-husband? What are you talking about? We are not divorced, are we? He wondered. What are you saying? I was puzzled. You want a divorce, don't you? Let's do it. He must have never thought I really wanted a divorce. My ex-husband was in shock and hung his head. In the end, he and his family were taken into custody for their disorderly conduct and property damage, and I made sure to claim the cost of the broken window. It's funny, they seemed to think they could naturally move into my new home, having already canceled the lease on the apartment they lived in until immediately. Apparently, they were allowed to go home soon after being questioned by the police, but without any destination to go, they were left behind with the luggage they planned to bring to the new home. My ex-husband begged, please, we have nowhere else to go. I won't say any more bad things, just for now, let us stay here. But as someone who had already divorced him, he was a stranger to me, and I declined his request politely. My ex-mother-in-law and ex-sister-in-law also hurled insults at me, saying things like, what kind of person leaves their family in trouble? But to me, they were no longer family. I cut off all contact with my ex-husband and his family and severed all ties. Currently, it seems that they are living a cramped life in a new apartment that they have just rented. They used to live on the money from my ex-father-in-law's early retirement pension, my ex-sister-in-law's part-time job, and the money I had provided. Even with my ex-husband's low salary, they could barely make ends meet. It's just like karma to me. Meanwhile, I decided to invite my parents to live with me in my spacious new home, and the three of us would live together. Oh, how lovely! Are you sure about this? You are even living with Mom and Dad? My friend asked. It's fine. It's too spacious for me to live alone anyway. It's my way of repaying my parents for the trouble I caused them during my divorce, I said. Some people were surprised when they found out that I got divorced soon after building this house. thinking what a waste of a new home. But for me, being able to spend time with both of my parents in this house is the greatest happiness of all. If I had endured living with my ex-husband's family, I would have surely been treated like a servant every day, and my life would have been miserable. Compared to that, divorce is nothing. I'm glad I didn't sacrifice my own life for those people. From now on, I want to cherish each day for myself and for my parents. My name is Sophia Whitmore, and I'm a graphic designer who went freelance at 26. I have my own townhouse, an inheritance that came too early, thanks to a car crash that took my parents from me as a teenager. It's in a decent neighborhood where the sidewalks feel a bit too clean, and the shadows are always crisp against the concrete. My life is pretty quiet, me and my graphic tablet against the world, but it's a comfortable one that I've worked hard to build. Oliver came into my life like a spontaneous glitch in an otherwise smooth-running system. I met him at his bistro, where the rustic scent of herbs mingled with the laughter of diners. He was a culinary artist, and I found his creativity refreshing. It was as if he painted flavors while I dealt with visuals. We connected quickly, and soon enough those connections led to something more. We didn't go for the typical wedding madness. Instead, we signed some papers in an office and called it a partnership. That worked fine until Oliver made a choice that changed everything. One evening he told me his family had to move in with us. All 4 of them. It wasn't a question, more like a poorly phrased statement of unwanted fact. They had just lost their house to a bad investment or something. The details were foggy and needed a place to crash. They showed up with their lives in suitcases and bags, ready to settle in. From day one, the place didn't feel like mine anymore. Where I used to enjoy the silence, now there were unfamiliar voices echoing off the walls. Where I'd work in peace, sometimes late into the night, I was now interrupted with questions about where things were or what was for dinner. Oliver's folks and siblings took over, making themselves a little too at home if you ask me. They'd leave dirty dishes in the sink, laundry in the washer longer than necessary, and whenever I tried to talk to Oliver about it, he brushed off my concerns, said it was all temporary and they'd figure something out. But weeks turned into months, and temporary started to feel like a bad joke. I had a growing sense of being an outsider in my own home, and the irritation it bred in me was a slow burn. Oliver's family began making comments hinting that since I was doing so well for myself and had no mortgage to pay, I could afford to let them stay. I had to do something about this, but what? I don't think I ever felt so indecisive and trapped at the same time. Yet there was a part of me, a quietly simmering part, that knew this was unfair, and that it was time for me to take my life back somehow. It was time to start making plans, not just for changing the locks, but for changing my entire situation. It didn't take long for the initial awkwardness to evolve into full-on disruption. Oliver's relatives, with their lack of boundaries, had turned my orderly townhouse into something unrecognizable. It was like my space had been hijacked, and with it, my peace of mind. I'm not the confrontational type. I'd rather work through issues with calm discussion than shouting matches, but that wasn't working here. Oliver's family saw the townhouse, my sanctuary, as a hotel without the bill. His parents took over the living room every evening, binging on TV shows as if they'd discovered Netflix for the first time. And it wasn't just a matter of space. They somehow expected me to pay for their newfound entertainment habit, adding premium channels without even asking. Meanwhile, his sister had made a habit of bringing friends over at all hours, turning the kitchen into their personal hangout spot. The younger brother treated the place like a gym, leaving weights and exercise gear all over. I love my quiet downtime, the space to get lost in my designs, but with them around, quiet was the last thing I got. Oliver wasn't much help. He'd promised to talk to them, but nothing ever came of it. It was always, they're looking for jobs, or they're stressed about finding a new place. But there were no signs of job hunting or house searches, just a lot of lounging and leaving messes for me to clean up. I started to feel like an extra in my life story. Once, when I dared to challenge Oliver's sister about invading my home office while I was on a deadline, she had the audacity to laugh. "You can't kick us out," she said. "Family sticks together, right?" It was clear they had no intention of leaving. Frustrations piled up like the unwashed dishes they'd leave in the sink. Worse, there was a new underlying tension, a shift in how Oliver and his family viewed me. I could hear it in their hushed conversations. The words free ride and easy living were thrown around. They were trying to play the guilt card, trying to make me feel responsible for their comfort. Concern gnawed at the back of my mind. What started as an inconvenience was quickly turning into a standoff. I had to draw the line somewhere. The realization hit me one evening after another day tiptoeing around my supposed guests. This wasn't just about reclaiming my space. It was about standing up for my own worth. That's when the seed of my plan took root. My patience was wearing thin, but that was nothing compared to the shock I got when I opened my latest credit card statement. There, line by line, were charges I didn't recognize. Luxury items, daily takeouts, subscriptions to services I'd never even heard of. It felt like a physical blow. Each line a testament to Oliver and his family's lack of respect. I called the credit card company, and what they told me next was the turning point. Oliver had added his family as authorized users without telling me. They had been swiping away with cards linked to my account, living it up on my dime. I confronted Oliver about it when he got home that night. His explanation? You were stressed about money, so I thought I'd help out. You're doing well and my family needed some support. Support? What a word to use when you're financially sabotaging someone. He didn't get it, or he didn't want to. Either way, his defense made no sense. He was justifying their actions like they were entitled to my earnings, and that was something I couldn't let slide. As I went to bed that night, his words replayed in my head: support, family, entitlement. The truth was loud and clear. This wasn't about family support, it was about control. Oliver and his relatives were trying to anchor themselves into my life using guilt and financial dependence, and the worst part was, for a moment, I felt the pull of that guilt. But lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I made a vow to myself. This was my life, my house, and my hard-earned livelihood. No one, not Oliver, not his family, had the right to claim it as theirs. It wasn't just about getting them out anymore. This was about setting things right. I needed to put an end to this invasion and to ensure nothing like this ever happened again. For that to happen, Oliver and his family had to go, not just out of my house, but out of my life too. With each day that passed, my townhouse felt less like home and more like a stage for Oliver's family drama. But the real showstopper was finding out they were abusing my trust financially. The credit card fiasco opened my eyes, and I knew I couldn't let this go on. It was time to get my house in order, figuratively and literally. My heart pounded just thinking about the confrontation, but this was about reclaiming what was mine. I waited for Oliver to return from work, rehearsing the words in my head over and over again. When he finally walked through the door, all casual like he owned the place, I was ready. "We need to talk," I said, cutting to the chase. "It's either me or your family. They can't stay here anymore." Oliver's reaction was a mix of shock and annoyance. "What's gotten into you? They're not doing any harm. We're just going through a tough time." But I wouldn't budge. "No, Oliver, no more excuses. They have until the end of the week or I'm the one leaving." There was fire in my voice, something I didn't even know I'd possessed. It wasn't an empty threat either. I had already started looking for a new place, one where I could work and live in peace without unwanted guests turning my world upside down. Oliver tried to argue, citing family ties and responsibility, but I knew better now. His words were just another form of manipulation, and I wasn't falling for it anymore. The conversation didn't end with a resolution, just a thick silence that hung between us. Oliver retreated to his family, and I could hear their low murmurs as they discussed this new development. I was done being a pushover. The line had been drawn, and as I packed a small bag that night, my resolve only grew stronger. If they weren't out by my deadline, I would be the one to walk away. The next morning, I left early, leaving Oliver and his relatives to their thoughts. The townhouse felt like a battleground, but I was no longer on the defensive. I was taking charge, and I'd be damned if I let anyone else dictate the terms of my life. That evening, I didn't go back. Instead, I found refuge at my uncle's house, another safe haven much like my townhouse used to be. As I settled into the guest room, I felt an odd sense of calm. This was the first step to rebuilding my life on my terms, and there was no turning back. Staying at my uncle's house gave me the breathing room I needed to think and plan my next steps. As the week crept by, I thought about the townhouse, my sanctuary, now a strange place filled with even stranger tensions. I knew Oliver and his family were still there, but the silence from their corner unnerved me. I realized that no compromise would come from Oliver. I had to stand my ground firmly. My lawyer, upon hearing the situation, was ready to help untangle the mess that my life had become. We started with the credit cards, canceled and cut up, each one a snip at the ties that bound me to this unwelcome predicament. After that, we moved on to the house. I had no intention of losing it to a situation I never agreed to. My lawyer prepared the eviction notices, and I signed them with a steady hand. If Oliver and his family wouldn't leave voluntarily, the law would assist me in reclaiming my property. Despite my attempts to remain detached, it was hard not to feel a simmering anger at Oliver's betrayal. Once I thought we had something special. Now I knew better. His actions spoke of agreeableness, not love, and mine would be a response with the necessary finality. The week slid by and I made my calculations. Once out, Oliver and his family wouldn't have their pampered lifestyles funded by my hard work. They'd abused my trust, my finances, and my patience, and now consequences awaited. I had been in touch with utility companies too, letting them know the services at the townhouse were to be discontinued. The bills were all in my name after all. They'd soon learn that their free ride was coming to an abrupt end. My distance gave me clarity, but it didn't make the upcoming confrontation any less daunting. When my phone buzzed with Oliver's name, I ignored it. This time, he'd need to hear what I had to say through official channels. Any personal connection we might have had was officially severed. As I prepared to send in the eviction notices, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of victory. I was no longer the passive partner in this case. Power was shifting, and I was tipping the scales in my favor. The shift was palpable even from the distance of my uncle's welcoming home. The townhouse, where I once harbored dreams, now stood as a battleground, and I had fired the opening salvo with my silent retreat and the dispatched eviction notices. Whenever my phone lit up with Oliver's name, a wave of mixed emotions washed over me, but I kept my resolve and directed him to my lawyer. There was a strange relief in avoiding those direct confrontations, knowing fortified legal barriers now stood between us. Without me to temper the household, Oliver's relatives began feeling the practical consequences of their choices. The taps ran dry, the lights went out, and the warmth receded as utilities were systematically disconnected. The fortress they had commandeered was crumbling. My lawyer relayed updates with a professional detachment I envied. Oliver had been frantically trying to negotiate to restore what they had lost, yet the truth was there for him to see. The house and all its amenities were never his to control or negotiate with. The truth also dawned on his family. Without the easy luxuries and without me to manipulate, life was suddenly less comfortable. Their plea for sympathy and second chances was swallowed by the silence of the phone they tried to reach me on. Each update from my lawyer was an affirmation of my regained strength. Watching the spectacle of Oliver's family packing up their belongings and fleeing the townhouse they briefly thought was theirs was the excuse I'd longed for. Oliver remained until the very end, stubborn or maybe clueless to the fact that his ability to stay was never up to him. Finally, a defeated man, he left the keys on the kitchen counter, the stage of so many family gatherings now silent, the last to vacate the invaded sanctuary, with the townhouse returned to its rightful state, empty, quiet, waiting for me to breathe life back into its rooms. I exhaled a deep, cathartic breath. This chapter of my life had come to a close, and my actions had spoken louder than Oliver's deceptive promises ever could. My return to the townhouse was measured, each step deliberate as I reclaimed the space that was always mine. There was much to do in reorganizing, redecorating, and removing the remnants of Oliver's presence, but it was a task I approached with vigor. It was not just about a physical space, it was about taking back my life. The silence of the townhouse was deafening as I walked through the door for the first time since Oliver and his family left. The spaces that once felt suffocating were now entirely my own again. I was free to rebuild, free to start over, free to be just Sophia. The emptiness was both a relief and a stark reminder of the recent past. As I took in the blank walls and cleared surfaces, I thought about how I'd nearly lost myself in an attempt to please someone else. Now, every room echoed the promise of a fresh start. My first weekend back was spent meticulously removing all traces of Oliver and his relatives. I scrubbed, painted, and rearranged, each stroke and shift a cathartic release. I replaced the memories of their presence with plans for my future independence. During the cleanup, I found random items they'd left behind. A sock under the bed, a mug in the cupboard. Each discovery was tossed without sentiment. I was erasing their footprints from my life, one piece at a time. With the physical space returning to a blank slate, I started working on myself too. The ordeal had changed me. The betrayal had toughened me. I promised myself that I'd never again let someone take advantage of my kindness. I would be more vigilant, more discerning. My work picked up rapidly. Without the stress and chaos of unwanted guests, my creativity blossomed anew. I revamped my portfolio, reached out to new clients, and watched as my freelance career flourished. The very thing they tried to use against me, my success, was now my saving grace. I let my lawyer handle the finalization of our partnership dissolution. Oliver tried to fight it, but there was no ground left for him to stand on. I watched from a measured distance as our legal ties unraveled. All the while, I found solace in the simple things. Quiet evenings with a book, mornings spent sipping coffee and sketching in the sunlight that poured through the windows. I was rebuilding my home and my heart piece by piece. As I settled into my reclaimed life, I allowed myself to dream again. Dreams not of revenge or bitterness, but of peace and new opportunities. And while there was no telling what the future held, one thing was for sure. It was mine to shape as I pleased. Weeks turned into months since I'd reclaimed my townhouse, and with each new day, I grew more confident in the solitude that I had once feared. The loneliness that Oliver's absence might have brought was instead filled with a renewed sense of purpose. I often walked through the rooms, appreciating how the sun cast new shadows in the morning light, how the space felt complete with just me in it. Realizing that what I had once shared out of love was now entirely mine brought a unique satisfaction, one that was laced with hard-earned wisdom. No longer did I feel the pangs of the past's intrusions. Instead, I focused on the future and the endless possibilities it presented. My business was thriving more than before, and with the borders of my life redrawn, a newfound peace settled over me. I learned the importance of setting boundaries, of understanding that generosity did not equate to naivety. The events with Oliver had taught me these lessons. Though difficult, they now became the pillars upon which I rebuilt my confidence in my life. Though I had friends who hinted at new romantic endeavors, I was content in my independence. I cherished my freedom, knowing that if love were to find me again, it would have to respect and elevate the life I proudly led on my own. As I finalized the last of my legal obligations, I realized the version of myself who first walked into that partnership office was long gone. In her place stood a woman tempered by experience, certain of her value, and protective of her hard-won sanctuary. The digital canvases that filled my days were bolder now, infused with the strength of my story. Clients recognized the depth and authenticity in my designs, which seemed to resonate more widely than ever. In the quiet of the evening, as I looked out of my window at the world below, I understood the truth of my journey. It was not just about the fight for my home or my finances. It was a reclaiming of my narrative, taking back the pen that had been briefly stolen and scripting a new, self-fashioned path. The scars of deception and manipulation would fade with time, but the lessons, those would remain. They had become part of the tapestry of Sophia Whitmore, woven with threads of tenacity and resilience. As the final chapter of this experience closed, I found comfort in knowing that the story ahead was mine alone, unwritten, unbound, and full of hopeful beginnings. My name is Adriana, and I'm 38 years old. I have a husband named Ray. He is the eldest of 3 brothers, both of whom are married and have 1 child each. Among the younger brothers are Truett and Harley, who are also very kind and good people. Their wives are both lovely. Lately I've been hearing a lot about troubles between my brothers-in-law, but I have nothing to do with such things. I'm blessed with great sisters-in-law, and we get along well. But there is one problem. Ray's mother, my mother-in-law. When we got married, there was no problem at all. My easygoing and kind-hearted mother-in-law, who had a cute smile, was also kind to me. I thought I was lucky to have such a wonderful mother-in-law. My father-in-law, who has passed away now, was also a very kind person. When I married Ray, I remember thinking how lucky I was to marry someone and become part of such a lovely family. A few years after our marriage, his younger brothers-in-law, Truett and Harley, got married. Soon after, my sisters-in-law became pregnant. That's when my mother-in-law's attitude towards me started to change. At first it was just small things. Ray is the oldest son, so we lived in an apartment near his parents' house and visited them regularly. One day, I wasn't served tea anymore. At that time my father-in-law had already passed away, so I thought my mother-in-law had just forgotten. I asked her, "Mother-in-law, may I have some tea?" She replied, "Think for yourself." I had never been spoken to like that by my mother-in-law before, and I was so surprised and shocked that my voice trembled when I said, "I'm sorry." Looking back, this might have been the beginning of it all. After that, my mother-in-law blamed me for not being able to have children and began to berate me. Of course, I didn't say anything to my husband. In fact, it seemed like I was spoiling him more than ever before. My husband himself was happy to have his mother's support, so he completely ignored the fact that I was being bullied so badly. Days like this continued for several years, until one day we celebrated the 4th birthday of the daughter of one of my husband's brothers, Jenna, at my in-laws' house. Everyone gathered to have a birthday party. My husband and I bought a gift and headed to my in-laws' house. When we arrived, almost everyone was already there. "You're late. Is everything okay?" my mother-in-law asked. "I'm sorry, the road was congested," I replied. "I wasn't asking you. You're always slow getting ready. Don't trouble Ray, since putting on makeup doesn't make much of a difference anyway," she said to me. Ray saw how she treated me, but as usual, he didn't try to help me and quickly went inside. It would be nice if he could say something to his mother on my behalf. I followed my husband into the living room with the faint hope that things might turn out differently. By the time we arrived, everyone was already there, including Jenna, my niece, and the star of the day. Jenna ran over to me with a big smile on her face. "Happy birthday," I said to her. "Thank you for coming," she replied with a smile, and I felt my heart lighten. But then my mother-in-law, not wanting to dampen the joyous mood, said, "Stop chatting and help with the preparations already," in a tone only I could hear. "I'm sorry," I murmured quietly before heading towards the kitchen. There, I found Jenna's mother and my sister-in-law, Estelle. "I'll help too," I said to her. "We just ordered sushi for today, so all you need to do is prepare the chopsticks and plates. I just finished, so please take it easy," Estelle said to me. I saw that there might be a lot of cooking and cleaning to do, but apparently not. My mother-in-law was just unhappy that I was having a good time chatting with Jenna. Estelle and I carried small bowls and chopsticks to the tables and set them for each person. As we set the tables, I smiled a bit. We put the sushi on each table and everything was ready. Everyone started to sit down. As my husband Ray took the seat designated by my mother-in-law, I delightedly sat next to him. "Wait, Truett is supposed to sit next to Ray, so you can't sit there." "Then where can I sit?" I asked, but I was ignored. I ended up just standing there like a pole. After a while, my mother-in-law said, "Well, shall we begin?" But I still hadn't sat down, and there were no more seats with sushi left for me. "Excuse me, mother-in-law, where should I sit?" I asked. "Oh, I completely forgot about you. Just sit wherever there's an empty seat," she replied. I sat in the seat at the far end, but there were only small plates and chopsticks there, no sushi. I had a bad feeling, but I mustered up the courage to ask my mother-in-law, "Mother-in-law, there seems to be one piece of sushi missing." "Oh dear, I must have miscounted due to the number of people. I'm sorry, Adriana, would you like some bread instead?" my mother-in-law said with a smile. "Bread from last night in the kitchen," that's what she said. I was really confused, but my mother-in-law didn't seem to care and uttered, "Let's eat." Everyone else seemed confused too, but my husband Ray followed my mother-in-law's lead and started eating the sushi. As I began to eat my bread, Estelle, who was sitting next to me, whispered, "Adriana, we'll split it in half." "I'm sorry," I said. "It's all right, it's not fair that you don't have any. Besides, I won't be able to finish it all by myself anyway," she said. "Thank you," I replied. Wait a minute, what are you doing, Estelle? You're still young and want a second child, right? Then you have to eat a lot, my mother-in-law said. Although Estelle was worried about me, my mother-in-law said with a smile, "It's not like Adriana wants any children anyway." Watching my reaction, Estelle found herself in a difficult position, and I felt sorry for her too. "I'm okay, Estelle, so I'll just take the bread. Thank you very much," I said. Although Estelle wanted to say something with a pained expression, I pretended not to notice and started eating bread. I realized how pathetic I was, being the only one eating bread at the joyous feast, but I couldn't complain because I wasn't in a position to do so, so I endured and ate the bread. After everyone had eaten sushi, it was time to give Jenna her gift. I had bought something she had wanted for a while. When I went to give it to her, Ray snatched it away and gave it to Jenna instead. My mother-in-law was giggling again as she watched, even though I had gone to buy the present and paid for it myself. "Thank you." Jenna immediately began opening the wrapping paper, and upon seeing the contents, exclaimed while leaning towards me with joy, "Adriana, this is the one I told you I wanted. Thank you for remembering." She said that to me, but my mother-in-law quickly retorted, "Jenna, that's not from Adriana. Ray bought it for you." However, Jenna insisted, "No, I told Adriana I wanted this. Uncle wasn't supposed to know." Jenna repeatedly expressed her gratitude towards me, although her words made me feel relieved. Not everyone was pleased, specifically my husband and my mother-in-law. Throughout the conversation, I threw meaningful glances at Jenna every time she backed me up. Ignoring the hostility of the others, I continued chatting with Jenna, but then my mother-in-law interrupted. "Let's have a cake now, Adriana. Could you bring it over?" I had no choice but to get up and say, "Let's talk later, Jenna." I carried a fork and a dish created by Ingrid, my mother-in-law, as well as a knife for cutting the cake. The cake that was brought out looked magnificent, and it turned out to be from a famous store. Then my husband said, "Mom, I'll pay for the cake." He said this without even consulting me. Well, I had bought the gift for Jenna, so it was only natural that he should do something like this. When my husband saw me, he whispered to me quietly, "You'll pay for it first. I don't have any cash in my wallet today." I thought, is he kidding me? But it was too late. He had already said it. My mother-in-law whispered the amount to her, and I reluctantly pulled the money out of my wallet and paid. Her mother-in-law began cutting the cake and distributing it in order. "Did everyone get their cake? Shall we begin?" That's how my mother-in-law addressed us. Here we go again. I had a feeling this would happen, but as I suspected, there wasn't enough cake for me. There's my mother-in-law, my husband, Truett, Jenna, Estelle, and then the third son who joined us today, Harley. The cake was cut into 6 equal pieces. I noticed that there wasn't enough cake for me and immediately spoke up. "Mother-in-law, I doesn't have a piece of cake." But my mother-in-law just laughed and said, "It's okay, Adriana could stand to lose a few pounds. Besides, I went through the trouble of cutting it so nicely into 6 pieces. I won't be able to share it again." I felt uncomfortable and muttered, "It's okay, I'm fine. It's Jenna's birthday, so let's enjoy the cake without worrying about me." But honestly, I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to scream at my mother-in-law and my husband, but it's my niece's birthday and I didn't want to ruin the mood. I couldn't stand being there any longer, so I said, "Excuse me, I'm going to head home now." And I left by myself. Of course, my husband didn't offer to come with me. "I'm driving home so you can take the bus." I returned home by bus as instructed. A few hours later, my husband returned home in a good mood. I was out of my wits with today's event, so I asked my husband to do something about it. However, he just sneered and said, "You're being too much. You can't live life like this." I replied, "I didn't have any sushi or cake, and yet you didn't say anything either." Then he said, "Didn't mommy just say it was a small mistake? It's just sushi and a cake. Don't be cheap." I was hurt by his words and eventually locked myself in my room. These events have shown that I'm the only one to blame, and we didn't even attempt to resolve the issues through discussion. I have always been patient, but I was reaching my limit. For the first time, I seriously considered divorce and realized that our relationship had reached its limit. 1 week later, there was going to be a fireworks festival nearby, and my husband, my mother-in-law, Truett, Estelle, Jenna, and I were invited to go. I didn't really want to be in the same place as my husband and my mother-in-law after what happened on Jenna's birthday, so I politely declined. But then Jenna said, I don't want to go if Adriana is not coming. I reluctantly agreed to join them. We gathered a little before the fireworks started and decided to enjoy the food stalls until then. I didn't have much of an appetite, so I just watched. But when Jenna spotted the food stalls, she said, "I want some fried chicken." Suddenly, a group of men with cameras approached us and said, "Excuse me, may we talk to you?" They were from a TV station and were doing live coverage of the fireworks festival. It was a famous news program that even I knew about. They said they wanted to film our happy family, including Jenna, and everyone started getting excited. Since my husband, my mother-in-law, and even Truett agreed, the crew immediately began asking Jenna questions as she enjoyed her fried chicken. "Do you like the chicken? How does it taste?" "Yeah, it's tasty," Jenna responded with a smile. "But there's so much of it. Can you finish it all by yourself?" "I'll give the rest to Mom and Adriana," Jenna said while taking my hand. "It was my birthday the other day, but Adriana couldn't have any cake. Grandma always treats Adriana badly, so today I decided to give some joy to Adriana." Jenna beamed at me as she spoke. The staff looked uncomfortable, but kept the conversation going with forced smiles. "My grandma is very mean. On my birthday, everyone was eating sushi except for Adriana. She only got 2 boiled eggs. It was very cruel," Jenna said. Upon hearing this, the show's staff realized that things had gone too far and quickly wrapped up the interview. Of course, Jenna meant no harm. She didn't fully understand how live broadcasting worked and was just trying to protect me. Soon after, messages started pouring into my mother-in-law from people who had watched the broadcast. "How could you only give boiled eggs to your daughter-in-law? That's just terrible. You always said you had a good relationship with your daughter-in-law, but it looks like you were just doing her wrong." Neighbors and relatives were furious one after another. Eventually, my mother-in-law and husband left, allowing me to enjoy the fireworks display with Jenna's family. A weight lifted from my heart. A few days later, I decided to have a discussion with my husband and my mother-in-law at their home. When I told them that I wanted a divorce, my mother-in-law shouted, "No, that's not acceptable. I won't allow a divorce." However, it was only through Jenna's and others' involvement that everyone learned that I had suffered abuse at the hands of my mother-in-law, and that my husband had never helped me. When I mentioned this, they both turned pale and lowered their eyes. "You'd better go away with your mom who loves you more than I do, Mama's boy," I finished. I smiled and said my goodbyes to my in-laws. Since my husband seemed resigned to the divorce, he readily agreed, and it went through without incident. Now I live alone in an apartment near my workplace. My ex-husband and I lived in an apartment together before, but I paid for 80% of it, so he couldn't afford to stay there and ended up moving back in with his mother. Since then, Jenna had refused to see her grandmother and never went back to see her. On the other hand, I still regularly meet with Jenna's family and maintain our relationships. "Adriana, you have to celebrate my birthday with us next year too." When Jenna said that, I couldn't help but look forward to celebrating her birthday next year. My name is Eliana. It has been a year since I married my husband Levi, and we are soon approaching our 2nd anniversary. Levi and I have been dating since our university days, and our relationship has always been great. We attended the university outside of our hometown, so we lived in a rented apartment away from our families. Because of that, we had plenty of free time to spend together, not only during long breaks but also on regular days off. We would take on various part-time jobs and go on trips to different places. After graduating, both of us found jobs in Florida and became working professionals. Around 2 years into our careers, Levi proposed to me and we got married. I was truly happy. However, there was one issue. The mother of my husband, Levi. She was a woman with a strong personality, and I sensed that from the first time we met. It happened when I visited his parents' house for the first time after our marriage was decided. As we sat in the living room and engaged in casual conversation, Levi's mother suddenly called out to him, "Levi, could you bring some tea and snacks, please?" He replied saying, "I'll also make coffee while I'm at it." And with that, he headed towards the kitchen. Left alone with my mother-in-law, I couldn't help but feel nervous and remained silent for a while. Then my mother-in-law said, "Eliana, I heard you and Levi met in college, so that means you have the same level of intelligence as Levi, right?" She stared at me intently as she spoke. I could feel the pressure coming from my mother-in-law. but I knew I couldn't be intimidated at this moment. Yes, that's correct. Although Levi's academic performance was far better than mine, I tried to divert the conversation by praising him. In response, my mother-in-law said, "Well, of course that's only natural, isn't it? Just by looking at you, I can tell you're not very sharp." She began to laugh. What is wrong with this woman? I couldn't tell if she disliked me, but she was certainly displaying an attitude of looking down on me. However, considering that she was the mother of the person I loved, and this was our first meeting, I remained silent. Then my mother-in-law glanced at me and said, "Well, anyway, you two will probably break up eventually." Caught off guard by her sudden remark, I was at a loss for words when Levi returned. "What were you talking about?" he asked. "Nothing much, really. I was just asking about the nature of your relationship, that's all," the mother-in-law-to-be said casually, and started another trivial conversation. The change in my mother-in-law's attitude was so drastic that it filled me with fear. Even after returning home, I couldn't help but wonder why she said such things to me. Did I do something to offend her? I had no idea, and ended up feeling frustrated as the evening went on. From that point on, my mother-in-law never made snide remarks about me in front of Levi. She simply kept saying we would break up soon. As our wedding with Levi drew near, I couldn't stand the lingering unease any longer, so I decided to tell Levi the truth. "Actually, I've been keeping this to myself, but your mother has been telling me to break up with you ever since we first met," I confessed, and Levi widened his eyes in disbelief. "That can't be true. Mother would never say something like that." At first he found it hard to believe, but when he saw me crying he realized it was true. "I'm sorry for not noticing. I'll talk to my mother about this," he assured me. The next day, as promised, Levi contacted his mother. "Don't ever say anything strange to Eliana again. My intention to marry her hasn't changed," he firmly declared. Then my mother-in-law stopped making snide comments towards me, and we had a peaceful wedding ceremony blessed by many well-wishers. However, after that we tried to avoid going to my in-laws' house as much as possible. Of course, there were occasions and family events where we had to gather at their place, so we discussed it with my husband and tried to attend as best as we could. But ever since we got married, my mother-in-law started making snide remarks to me without any concern for my husband's presence. "Why can't you do such simple things? How could you think of getting married and starting a family?" She would incessantly say such things. Furthermore, she would tell me to help with housework. So I asked, what should I do? But she completely ignored me. When I tried to do something I thought was helpful, she would say, "I didn't ask you to do that. Figure out what needs to be done and act accordingly." She unreasonably scolded me. Every time my mother-in-law glared at me, I felt like crying, but I endured it for the sake of my husband. Whenever my mother-in-law raised her voice in anger, my husband would immediately come to my defense. "Mother, cut it out. If you keep saying weird things, we'll leave." He always stood up for me like that. When my husband got angry, my mother-in-law would grumble but eventually quiet down. That's how I managed to endure. My husband would say, "You don't have to force yourself to go back to my parents' house." But as someone who had married into the family, I wanted to get along with my mother-in-law as much as possible and hoped to earn her approval someday. That's why I couldn't afford to make a fuss or overreact to things. For the sake of my husband, I needed to become a daughter-in-law recognized by my mother-in-law and build a good relationship with her. With my limited abilities, that's what I thought. During the New Year's visit to my in-laws' house, as expected, Levi came to my rescue, so I had stopped worrying about my mother-in-law so much. When we returned home from my in-laws' house, Levi apologized again. "I'm sorry, Eliana, for my mother once again." And I said, "It's okay. Thank you for always standing up for me, Levi." I expressed my gratitude. Levi said, "I'm going to take a bath," and headed to the changing room. After my husband came out of the bath, we discussed the schedule for work after the new year. Then my husband said, "I might have more business trips coming up." He suddenly mentioned that. Since there had been business trips about once every few months before, I didn't think much of it and replied, "I see, it's going to be tough." But a few days later in the evening, he said, "The dates for the business trip have been decided. It's next weekend." My husband, who came home from work, brought up the topic. It was the first time that a business trip was decided so suddenly, so I was surprised. But he said, "There's a crucial deal that might come through. He said that, and I couldn't help but admire how seriously he was dedicated to his work. Since I was also continuing with my own job, it didn't mean that I would feel lonely all day just because my husband was on a business trip. On the contrary, knowing that my husband was working hard motivated me to do the same. I said to my husband, "I understand. Don't push yourself too hard, okay?" And my husband replied, "Thanks, I'm going to take a bath," saying that he took off his shirt and headed to the bathroom. I picked up the shirt my husband had left lying idle, a little annoyed, and decided to take it to the washing machine, but then one detail caught my eye. There was a faint trace of lipstick line staying on the chest area of the shirt my husband was wearing. In an instant, an unpleasant premonition crossed my mind, and I had to stuff the shirt into the washing machine. No way, there's no chance Levi would do something like that. I tried to convince myself that it couldn't be true, and quickly returned to the living room. Then, almost as if timed perfectly, my husband's phone, which he had left on the sofa, vibrated. With the unsettling feeling growing inside me, I couldn't resist the urge to look at my husband's phone screen even, though I knew it was wrong. And there it was displayed on the screen. Ever. Maybe it was just a colleague from work, but there was also the possibility of an affair. With that thought in my mind, I mustered up the courage and answered the call. "Hello," as I said that. "Oh, why?" she said, and then the call abruptly ended. It was clearly the voice of a young woman. If it was just someone from work, there's no reason for them to hang up so abruptly, I thought. Thinking that, I immediately felt something was off and started searching through my husband's phone right then and there. Inside my husband's phone, I found numerous exchanges with his smart pool affair partners. The content of their conversations made it clear that they were more than just friends. It seemed like they were planning a trip together next weekend. The next weekend, my husband mentioned he was going on a business trip. It's not a business trip. This is undoubtedly an affair. With that realization, I was surprisingly calm, even to myself. I transferred the exchanges between my husband and his affair partner, as well as the couple's photos I found in the photo folder to my own phone, and waited for my husband to come out of the bath. During that wait, I didn't shed a single tear, and for some reason I didn't feel anger either. I was just endlessly wondering how it had come to this. Those thoughts were swirling around in my head. After a while, my husband finished his bath and stepped out. "Oh, that was a good bath," he said in his usual tone. I asked him, "Where are you going on your business trip next weekend?" My husband didn't show any signs of nervousness and replied, "I'm going to LA. I'll bring you back a souvenir." In that moment, something inside me crumbled. I see. Was this person always someone who could lie so easily? I thought. It was the moment when I had completely had enough of him. "A business trip to LA? That's not true, is it?" I calmly told my husband. "Was it ever? She seems like a young girl," I continued. "You have a lot of nerve lying about the business trip and going on vacation instead," I finished. "Did you look at my phone without permission?" my husband asked. I was a little surprised. Instead of getting flustered when asked about his affair, my husband was now lashing out at me. I received the call. It said "ever," so I thought it was someone from work. It's named urgent, so I picked it up. But then a woman answered. She hung up immediately, so I thought it was suspicious. I explained calmly to my husband. "It's terrible to look at someone else's belongings without permission," he added. At that moment, I completely gave up hope. Maybe he would deny having an affair. It was a faint expectation, but it was possible that he was lying about cheating altogether. However, my husband didn't deny the affair and instead blamed me for my actions of asking about it. "I'm at my limit. Let's get a divorce." When I said that, my husband fell silent. "Why are you silent? You cheated, didn't you? Until I found out, everything was fine. You have such a casual attitude about it, don't you?" I added. "Fine, I get it. Let's get a divorce. I'll do it for you," he said. At that moment, I heard a pain in my chest that was indescribable. It wasn't physical pain, but it was the most painful feeling I had ever experienced. I tried to hold back tears and headed back to my room, but my husband stopped me and said, "My mom's coming over tomorrow." "What? Why? Your mother has nothing to do with this." When I said that, my husband walked past me and went into his room. Anyway, that's how it is. I didn't understand what was going on, and tears of anger and frustration started to flow. All of the pain, frustration, and sadness from my husband's betrayal mixed together and flowed out. The next day, my mother-in-law arrived. I ignored her and sat down in the chair. "Eliana, you know about Bella, don't you?" she asked with a smirk, looking at me. "Whatever? You know everything, don't you?" I said angrily. "How does you know about Bella?" I continued. When I asked her that, my mother-in-law revealed something I had never imagined. "How should I know? It's because I introduced Bella to Levi," she said calmly. "What?" Everything went dark in front of me. My mother-in-law continued talking, completely unfazed. "Bella is a good girl who goes to the same yoga class as me. I don't need a daughter-in-law like you who can't be of any use." At that moment, I looked at my husband, but he didn't even look at me, let alone show any concern for me. All of my anger boiled up, and I said coldly, "I take everything I bought with me." My mother-in-law laughed and said triumphantly, "I don't need your used and dirty things." So I took a deep breath and said to my mother-in-law and husband, "I see. Well then, please leave right away for now." "Huh?" My mother-in-law looked at me with wide eyes. In response to her, I said, "All the furniture, appliances, and of course this house, I put them all under my name." When I said that, my mother-in-law started trembling in disbelief. "You must be lying. Levi hasn't contributed even $1. There's no way." At my mother-in-law's panicked words, my husband spoke up. "Mom, it's true. This house and all the furniture were bought by Eliana's parents. That's impossible. Are you really going to give up such a nice house?" my mother-in-law said. "We have no choice," my husband uttered. "Come on, help me pack our things. I'm leaving." After he said that, my mother-in-law reluctantly began to help him pack. "Please leave quickly. I will call the police," I insisted. Saying that, the two of them hurriedly packed their things and left the house. It seemed that the woman my husband had an affair with had no idea he was married, so she came to me to apologize. Bella quickly ended her relationship with my ex-husband, and apparently, she even blocked his calls. When he had nowhere else to go, my ex-husband returned to his parents' house. However, in the neighborhood near their place, rumors had already spread that the mother-in-law instigated her son to cheat, and the husband got caught cheating and was kicked out of the house. Now he was ashamed to even go outside. On the other hand, I took a long-awaited peaceful vacation and went on the trip with my parents. They were worried about me, but I have completely let go of any lingering feelings. I may be fed up with marriage, but I still believe the family is something to cherish. From now on, I want to prioritize relationships with people who truly value me.